Hello, this is YumongX. Today is June the 24th, Wednesday. This morning I had a Twitter discussion with the US-China Economic, Security and Review Commission. So in this video, I am going to present the details of this discussion. Please join the discussion by leaving a comment down below in the comment section. I would really appreciate your effort in doing so. And I'm looking forward to learning about your points of view on the same topic. 小雨们，小雨们，This is the Twitter posting this morning by US-China Commission. Apparently, there is a live streaming of the hearings by US-China Commission. The panel 1 is on China's approach to strategic competition. Panel 2 is on US-China competition and cooperation on the world stage. And panel 3 is about future prospects for strategic competition toward a Cold War, hot war, or a cold peace. This is my reply. I said, I believe it is in the best interests of the American and Chinese people to have a normal relationship based on integrity, goodwill, mutual understanding, respect, and benefits, which is obviously in conflict with the vested interests of some rich and powerful in U.S. and their gang friend. I also said, looks like you have got the first thing wrong. You judge China and Chinese by standards based on Western jungle culture, showing unbelievable ignorance of the importance placed on integrity, 正直 in Chinese, honor, 脸面, actually means 荣誉, and what is right, 天理天道, by Chinese culture. Bad starting point. As I used 脸面 in the above posting for honor, actually 脸面 is not the direct translation of honor, which actually means, honor actually means 荣誉, but 脸面 is so closely connected to 荣誉 that I think it is more appropriate to use 脸面 here. US-China Commission tweeted, Dr. Frankenstein, the military component of this rivalry predicts the current downturn in relations. There have been military tensions in the relationship. Sometimes the military dimensions have been in the forefront, and sometimes they have operated in the background. My reply is USA is overly militarized, forcing other countries to react, which is what happened between USSR and the USA. What good has USA achieved, even with the perceived victory of Cold War? Majority of people in both countries are certainly not benefiting from it. Some individuals got rich, that's all. When the USSR, the Soviet Union, was dissolved, a lot of national assets were sold to individuals, and a lot of them were purchased by foreign individuals. Here in this one, US-China Commission is replying to someone saying, military competition between China and the US in the Indo-Pacific is a contest between two operational versions. China's apparent vision is to ensure that no potentially hostile foreign military can operate in the vicinity of the PRC with impunity. My reply to this is nothing wrong with that. Wouldn't you agree? USA thinks the same about its own territory and security, right? And so do all other countries, right? Now let's look at this one. USA China tweeted, broad Chinese 5-year plans and industrial policies through the turn of the century displayed a consistent record of failure. What kind of mentality is this? So I replied, typical sour grape syndrome. You are acting like a sore loser. Pull yourself together. I think there is a typo there. It says sour loser. It should be a sore loser. Okay, then US China Commission tweeted, the most effective response to today's China will be to show them that their assessment of the window of strategic opportunity is wrong and that they will not succeed in achieving their aims by dividing the world into a group of weak, declining, and squabbling powers. Born and raised in China, from my perspective, I think this is a gross misunderstanding or misinterpretation. So I tweeted, purely projecting, being paranoid, wrongfully accusing, and deliberately stirring up the pot. Shame on you. US China Commission tweeted again. Witnesses have begun to deliver their testimony. First up is B. Norton. I think it's Baron Norton from UCSD. China is ambitious. Policymakers benchmarked almost exclusively against the United States, never against other developing countries. With this, I replied, you are misinterpreting and overreacting. China uses US as a benchmark. It just shows that China considers US to be the best. No one wants to benchmark after even second best. Not saying that what China is doing is a mistake or not, since that needs more consideration beyond the here and now. Here, this one, US China Commission tweeted, the PRC has actively engaged in visiting Latin American military institutions and bringing the region's military personnel to China, creating opportunities for its government to obtain information and develop relationships for future cooperation in Latin America. To this, I replied, I am sure China is just doing what the US has been doing with its allies. Gang friends is more accurate, all along. China used to follow no alliance, but found itself too lonely, so it must have decided to do what US has been doing. Can't stand your own behavior? It's amazing that US criticizes other countries when they do exactly what US has done in the past. Such hypocrisy is shocking. Here is US China Commission tweeted, while the quote wolf diplomacy unquote being practiced by Chinese representatives overseas might play well in Beijing, it has served to alienate governments, media, and the general population across significant portion of the globe. To this I replied, you mean that the USA invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan is hailed as good diplomacy? Do you hear yourself? What are you on? So obvious there's something wrong there. Here in this one, U.S.-China Commission tweeted, on November the 29th, 2012, 2 weeks after his appointment as the new General Secretary, Xi Jinping visited the vast National Museum of China in Tiananmen Square. And I replied, don't see how this is wrong. It's not like he's visiting the Zhazidong concentration camp where the Kuomintang and the US CIA tortured communists who were fighting for freedom and democracy. There's no reason to become too sensitive and paranoid about this. So absurd. Here in this tweet, I made a mistake. And I corrected it when I was reading it. In this one, U.S.-China Commission tweeted, the 7 men toured an exhibition titled, quote, The Road to Rejuvenation, unquote, about China's history from the Opium War to the present day. It was there that China's new leader reviewed his, and by extension, the Communist Party's profoundly tortured views on the U.S. Yeah, it says tortured views. So when it comes to other people's opinions and other countries' points of view, it is tortured. Tortured view, according to some Americans. How self-centered can one be? Just other people's opinions are just to be dismissed or invalidated like that. To which I replied, it is more accurate if you reverse your statement like this. The tortured, you mean distorted, views of China hawks in the US government? This reply of mine is not very good. Actually, I was trying to say that the above statement should be reversed. There is nothing worse than the tortured views of China by the China hawks in the US government. I'm not saying that the Chinese government or Chinese never misunderstand or misinterpret US. However, comparatively speaking, I think the ignorance and distortion on the US part is much more severe. In this one, US-China Commission tweeted, panel 2 begins with Christine Lee, 27. Eager to expand influence in the world stage in ways that serve its interests, Beijing has placed considerable resources behind an effort to present leadership at the UN as a nimbler, more dynamic, and a more reliable alternative to that of the US. To this I replied, is that how USA wielded its power sword in the UN? Is that how USA procured its influence? Which country has more military presence all over the world? China is a piece of cake compared with the USA. You are getting way ahead of yourself. Sound like hallucination and projection. I think I overreacted to this tweet. Actually, now at this time, I'm reading it again. I think it's as significant as I perceived it this morning. Whoops! Actually, I was getting ahead of myself. Okay, a little embarrassed. Okay, let's look at this one. US-China Commission tweeted, Beijing seeks to make its brand of authoritarian rule seem as legitimate, if not superior to, democratic governance. The CCP sees China as locked in a long-term struggle with liberal democratic nations, the United States foremost among these. And to which I replied, labeling scare tactics. US government is elected by a majority of a small portion of the population who actually turn out to vote. Not to mention that most politicians are in the pocket of special interests. Democracy means majority rule in China, not oligarchy like in the USA. Americans are pretty much stuck on this black label for the Chinese political system. It's Americans always say that the Chinese political system is authoritarian, or sometimes it's even worse. It's referred to as a dictatorship. This is just like, the Americans are looking at everything from their own perspective, and it shows the lack of empathy and understanding and acceptance and tolerance on the part of Americans. Okay, let's move on to this next one. U.S.-China Commission tweeted, Beijing is leveraging its tech champions in its bid to rebrand global governance in its own image. In 2018, Tencent launched a major collaboration with the UNDP. These arrangements position China's tech giants buying large quantities of foreign data for commercial gain. To replayed. U.S. has enjoyed many decades of power and influence obtained through leveraging, as you put it. Now that China starts to do it the Western way, you are screaming your head off. You really have a problem of letting your jealousy get in the better of you. Not healthy. I believe Americans are speculating about Chinese companies mining large quantities of foreign data. Actually, data mining is what a lot of US tech companies do. So they are projecting this onto Chinese companies. I am not saying that the Chinese companies are definitely innocent in this regard, but I'm just believe but I believe that even if it is true that Chinese companies are mining data, but this is not just a unique problem of Chinese tech companies. So Chinese companies should not be singled out for criticism or attacking in this case. In this one, it says China's single greatest source of strength has been the perception of the United States' repudiation of multilateralism and global leadership. I replied, if you know anything about China, China is more than happy for USA to lead, as long as the US plays fair and square. Why would the US repudiate its multilateralism and global leadership in the first place? Everything is either Russia's or China's fault. Look at yourself in the mirror. I'm really shocked at at some Americans' lack of self-awareness. For me, it's disgusting that some Americans make such a big fuss about being the number one in the world and also about global leadership. If the U.S. has been leading well, then, here's someone at the U.S. China Commission hearing saying, East Asia is the only region where both the US and China have identified core interests and where failure or success could be a game changer for their respective global and regional roles and ambitions. My reply to this is, wow, the world is going to end if China gets a piece of the pie after centuries placidity and non-competitiveness. Isn't competitiveness a sought after quality that the US values? What? It is bad if the competition is unfavorable to US? I see. I'm sure the sense of urgency and alarm that's being sounded here are ridiculous. Um, it's I'm sure China is more concerned about defense and national security rather than being the number one or getting a bigger piece of the pie, like what these Americans are mistakenly thinking. Okay, let's move on to the next one here. The same person tweeted, China has not been effective in foisting its norms, values, and narratives on U.S. allies and partners. China's non-democratic, one-party authoritarian political model has almost zero resonance amongst elites and publics. My reply to this one is waving the label of non-democratic, one-party authoritarian political model and denying the cultural uniqueness of the Chinese political system is getting old and annoying. You need to get some diversity training. You need to accrue your continuing education credit. I am so sick of hearing Americans or otherwise chanting these cliches when they talk about China. It's just so empty and so absurd and so unfair and so basic and so low life. Okay, now let's look at this one from the US China Commission. Someone tweeted, although the PRC calls its engagement as win-win, they are better characterized as China first, letting the US and the region bear the consequences and pick up the pieces. To this, I replied, is that what US and its gang friends have been doing? Sorry, grammar mistake. Is that what US and its gang friends have been doing? Leaving non-white people bear the consequences and pick up the pieces? No one stops you to negotiate with China to make sure US is winning as well. Stop screaming and start working together. You are whining like a 2-year-old. Okay, this one is apparently from someone called Evans Ellis. This person says, through those enterprises as its tools, the PRC approach is fundamentally neo-mercantilistic. It uses its companies to build and dominate the infrastructure and associated overseas operations and markets that enable that generation of transfer of wealth. To this I replied, if China is neo-mercantilistic, then US is mercantilistic. US invented mercantilism. US is still the winner. What are you complaining about? You should be congratulating USA. I have taken my time to give you some perspective. Hope you appreciate it. Here, this one from the US China Commission. However, through 2005, There was not any kind of coherent planning for specific industrial development, and certainly not for any target to displace the United States. To this I replied, relax and chill. China just wants to do the best to build the country and serve its people. There is nothing wrong with what China is doing. Uh, if what is wrong is the length through which that you are looking at China. Actually, my original reply to this tweet is not very worded, especially the last sentence. The syntax is just wrong. I was getting tired, so I tweeted, "It's exhausting to talk to a narcissist." My impression is that a lot of Americans think like narcissists. I think I've replied to this same tweet again. The one that says, through those enterprises as its tools, the PRC approach is fundamentally neo-mercantilistic. It uses its companies to build and dominate the infrastructure and associated overseas operations and markets that enable that generation of transfer of wealth. I said, I have been giving you some perspective since you are too extreme and too self absorbed. You're not fit to lead the country, not to mention the world. You have left your brain in the era of colonialism and imperialism. It's 21st century. What about embracing diversity, dictator? For me, and I believe for a lot of Chinese, regardless of their nationality or citizenship, um, I believe that a lot of Americans are too egotistic, too self centered, and too ignorant of other cultures. And they're also too paranoid, as there have been a lot of problems that the U.S. has failed to tackle in recent decades. Well, thank you for watching and give me some feedback. I would highly appreciate it. Thank you. See you next time. 小啦啦，雨梦 X 小雨梦，小啦啦，小啦。